This is The World According to Jen and Carolyn.
All right, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Stockholm Syndrome.
Yuck.
Which is kind of a dirty word, and we'll tell you why, or a dirty phrase. This we think is another example of a phrase that's become part of our English lexicon, but how many people know the origin of the term and what it means?
Right.
Furthermore, is it even a legitimate phenomenon or just something concocted by a couple of shrinks and perpetuated by the media? And because we want to make sure that you sound smart at parties, we're going to help you out. So we are going to dissect Stockholm Syndrome and help you understand not only what it means in its original iteration, but also how it's changed to be more victim/survivor centered, which is really important over the years. So, Carolyn, I know when I think of Stockholm Syndrome, there's one story that comes to mind.
Always.
And that's the story of Patty Hearst. I'm going to go into this in a little more detail later, but Patty Hearst was a very rich heiress to the Hearst media empire, which is right here in the Bay Area, or was, and was abducted by a revolutionary group and forced to rob a bank. And it's debatable whether she actually suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, but she became the poster child for Stockholm Syndrome nonetheless. So more to come on this. And, here's a quick and dirty definition of Stockholm Syndrome. This is the Cleveland Clinic. So Stockholm Syndrome is a coping mechanism to a captive or abusive situation. People develop positive feelings toward their captors or abusers over time. This condition applies to situations including child abuse, coach-athlete abuse, relationship abuse, and sex trafficking. But the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, doesn't actually define Stockholm Syndrome at all.
Right.
So what do you...
I have so many, as I read that term, and this is something that's so powerful, words are weapons. Mm-hmm. Or how we talk about things has to grow and change and evolve. And that's a good thing. And, I'm looking at this, people developing positive feelings toward their captors. That's not true. We're going to break a lot of this down, because yes, I think that is the general conception that people have, and it's just not victim-centered.
I agree. And you put an interesting statistic into our script here.
I did.
Also, if it exists at all, more to come, as she said, it's very rare. In a 2007 FBI hostage barricade data, which has 47,000 records of hostage reports. Wow, that's interesting.
I know.
So this was in time, found that 73% of captives display no affection for their abductors, which makes a lot of sense. So as we said, Carolyn's going to go way deeper on the psychology here in a minute. But first, we're going to do a little history lesson.
Yay.
Because a lot of people don't even necessarily know what Stockholm Syndrome is.
I didn't know
where
this story.
It comes from. Yeah, so, convicted criminal Jan Erik Olsson, while on furlough from prison, walked into a bank in, Normalstrog, Stockholm. Sorry, Swedish folks. On August 23rd, 1973, he fired into the ceiling and tried to rob it. I think some accounts I read said when he shot into the ceiling, he's like, it's time to party or something like that.
Wow.
I was like, this is my kind of guy.
All right.
When police quickly arrived, he took 3 hostages inside the bank, and number later increased by 1. After another bank employee was found in a storeroom, he demanded the equivalent of $700,000 in Swedish and foreign currency, as well as the release of an infamously charismatic and handsome criminal he knew from prison. I love how they threw in handsome. That's relevant.
Right.
But it makes it more Hollywood.
I guess so.
Yeah, and this dude's name, the handsome man, was Clark Olofsson. So Jan Erik had disguised his appearance and voice. I think he may have dressed up as a woman, actually. Speaking English with an American accent, and police police couldn't accurately identify him for days. They did, however, bring his old prison friend Clark to the bank. But they did it in a very peculiar kind of way, as a double agent in effect. So they told this dude, Jan Erik, suddenly found himself in a hostage taking situation. He intended a quick getaway bank robbery.
Oopsies.
And now he was in a situation that he was stuck. So he demanded that Clark come in to help him out. And the cops told Clark, they're like, hey, dude, you've got one job, and that's to go in and make sure that nobody gets hurt.
Yeah.
And help calm things down. And so, things did calm down temporarily when Clark arrived, and Miss Enmark, who was one of the captives, was allowed to make phone calls along with a fellow hostage, Brigitte Lundblad, and Elizabeth Oldgren and Sven Sofstrom. All right, I'm trying here, guys. Really, the police bungled this big time. I think that's really important to know when we talk about any sort of affection that was demonstrated toward captors. Know that the police really fucked this up.
Yes.
And the captors were actually, the captors were actually pretty nice to these folks. They believed, the police, they screwed it up. They believed that they had positively identified the bank robber, except they hadn't. They thought he was another infamous bank robber who had previously escaped from prison. So they had sent in that bank robber's civilian brother, along with an accompanying cops. And then, shots were being fired. There was all this confusion and craziness. So,
is it really easy to break out of prison in Stockholm?
I guess so. Okay. It doesn't seem like there's prisons are all that secure, but also they don't really have high rates of crime.
I was going to say, what do you have to do to get a prison in Stockholm, Sweden?
Probably a lot.
Okay.
At least in the conventional sense.
And
of
they're
prison.
still nice.
Yeah, they're still nice. So in the end, 6.5 days into the crisis, police stormed the bank with tear gas, even though Jan Erik had threatened to kill the hostages upon a gas attack and took him into custody. By this point, people were watching on TV and in the streets. So everybody was watching this. The hostages, however, particularly Miss Enmark, did not behave in the way police expected. By all accounts, the abductors were kind to their captives. They gave them air. They kind of let them go for walks on
nice.
long
so
leashes.
Nice. We gave you air.
No, they let them call their family. Apparently,
nice.
they were really nice about it. They were talking to the prime minister. Everything was, one gunman was talking to Brigitte when she couldn't get a hold of her family and said, Don't give up. Keep trying. Keep trying to reach them.
What a nice captor.
By all accounts, they were actually being really nice. And it makes sense, right? They didn't go in there intending on getting hostages. They're like, we just want our $700K and we want to get the fuck out of here. And then all of a sudden they're dealing with hostages. Yeah. And they're not aggressive people in that sense, it seemed like. So by the second day, the hostages were on a first name basis with their captors. They started to fear the police more than the abductors. And so, the police were kind of shocked by this. And psychiatrists compared the behavior to the wartime shell shock exhibited by soldiers and explained that the hostages became emotionally indebted to their abductors, not the police, for being spared death. So within months of this siege, psychiatrists dubbed the strange phenomenon Stockholm Syndrome, which became a part of the lexicon in 1974 when it was used in defense for kidnapped newspaper heiress Patty Hearst. All right, so there is the history of Stockholm Syndrome in a nutshell. My dog is having a dream. Orla, stop dreaming. loud ass dreams.
You don't have dreams and hopes.
It's great, right? It's great when it happens at 3 a.m. It's really my favorite thing. Carolyn, could you go a little deeper on the psychology here? I think we need to better understand why someone would, and frankly could, bond with someone who is actively depriving them of their freedom.
Well, I think that we're asking the wrong question here, Jen. Again, we already named that. First of all, the word Stockholm Syndrome is, it's a derogatory term. It needs to, we have to talk about these experiences and be very selective in our words. So I know you and I are both really going to try very hard to be on that same page with this. And if we oops, I do apologize. But yeah, it really is a derogatory term. This is something that is a media sensationalized term, and it didn't exist before this 1974 robbery. And as we named before, really it only happens in even 5% of hostage situations. And the scientific community is helping law enforcement, or I should say, actually the animal community and healers are helping the scientific community and law enforcement, social services and mental health and the public get away from a media hype term. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about this more when we get to the actual woman who helped single-handedly rewrite this script, which is J.C. Dugard. Typically, when media is talking about Stockholm Syndrome, they're saying, as I mentioned before, that positive bond with the captor, defining and supporting remaining with the captor versus the rescuer. This is a dynamic that you're seeing only exists within a captor-captee situation.
Okay.
It's I don't know this person. These two parties don't know each other prior to this traumatic event. And it only occurs between strangers, hostages, and their captors. So this term is often attached to other psychotherapy terms, such as trauma bonding, intimate partner violence, identification with the aggressor or oppressor, which is a psychodynamic term. So think Freud, battered woman syndrome, which is also something I don't like to use,
right?
Or learned helplessness. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of these terms a little more specifically. Those are things that happen in abusive relationships or attachment relationships where the two parties have an existing relationship prior to. When the media is talking about Stockholm Syndrome, what they intended, I think, to do was to say, hey, this is someone who this person found themselves in an extremely difficult situation. And this is about fear and survival. This is about a term that I'm going to talk a lot about called appeasement, and I'll define that even more. But you have a better chance of surviving if you remain not just compliant. It's not complying. You're actually co-regulating with your captor. You're appeasing them so that they don't kill you.
Yep. Yeah.
Learned helplessness. I can't tie my shoes to do it for me. If I don't do it, you're not going to kill me. The intimate partner violence, abuse, that's where you might see the crossover. And I think the mental health community is very confused about that.
Okay.
Can we stop being fucking confused and pathologizing and just help people?
Yeah.
Like, why do we have to have a goddamn label?
Why don't we just listen to them?
Why don't we just listen to them and have
feeling?
Yeah, and just listen and not have to define it or psychoanalyze it or give them a rubrics that helps them understand it. They don't need to understand it. They already did it.
Yeah, they lived it.
And so they're experiencing a traumatic, extreme, violent, life-threatening term. How dare any of us try to determine or ask questions about, well, why didn't they leave?
Yeah.
Or why didn't they do this? They didn't have a choice. In order to ask why, that assumes that the person had a choice. And when you believe someone's going to kill you, I don't think you have a lot of choices.
No.
You're just trying to not become an object that they could easily get rid of. So this sort of romanticizing that you see is just completely gross to me.
Yeah.
You know, J.C. Dugard at 11 is not romanticizing her captor.
Yeah.
She's trying not to die.
And we're going to talk more extensively about JC's situation.
So the fact that, we don't have a DSM term for this, the fact that scientists don't understand it. Who the fuck gives a shit? Again, this is not a pathology, and it's not a syndrome. Yeah. Syndromes have signs and symptoms. The closest thing you can link to this is PTSD as a response.
That makes sense.
But if you have people who don't even think this exists at all, or others see it as an unconscious identification with a captor, or even something as gross as a bond. Yeah. You're minimizing truly what's a coping strategy and a survival skill in a hopeless, horrific experience that you can't prepare for. Yep. Maybe in military, they're kind of preparing them to, but you can't do this in a controlled environment because it's humans.
I don't think anybody can be adequately prepared for something as horrific as war, for instance, right? Yeah. And that's why we see so many folks coming back from war with PTSD. Yeah. And with suicidal ideation, because they cannot cope. The human brain cannot cope.
Well, and I'm glad you said the brain. This is not happening in our brain. Yeah. This is happening in our body. Yep. This is happening as an intuitive resource skill of social engagement. Think of a cat and a mouse. Yeah. If what keeps the mouse what keeps the cat interested is that the mouse is moving. If the mouse plays dead, usually that it shows the animal, I don't want it.
Yeah.
No fun.
Yeah.
So this is not a conscious thing of, I'm going to smile and act nice to my captor so they don't kill me.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably just intuitively having to think every second out and feel.
Mm-hmm.
I would take that back. You're not thinking necessarily, you're feeling and you're noticing. And, again, it's like animals at a zoo, let us see them.
Yeah.
You think a lion can't get out of that cage? Hell no. But it also knows where its food comes from, and it knows it wouldn't survive if it left.
Yeah.
And so in the same sense, that's what someone who is captive and a hostage is going through as well.
Got it.
Their chance of survival is imperative that they co-regulate with their captor.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, because she was the poster child for Stockholm Syndrome and how we came to define Stockholm Syndrome, at least in the mainstream media, we got to talk about Patty.
Yes.
Got to talk about Patty Hearst and how she became the poster child for this. So on February 4th, 1974, Patty Hearst was a 19-year-old granddaughter of newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst. She's kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley by 3 armed strangers. Her fiancé, Stephen Weed, was beaten and tied up along with a neighbor who tried to help. So 3 days later, they were called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA for short. They're a small leftist group rooted in the U.S., and they announced in a letter to a Berkeley radio station that it was holding Hearst as a prisoner of war. 4 days later, the SLA demanded that the Hearst family give $70. It must be $70 million. This is $70. That ain't much. In foodstuffs to every needy person from Santa Rosa to Los Angeles. This done, said the SLA, negotiation would begin for the return of Patty Hearst. Randolph Hearst hesitantly gave away some $2 million worth of food. So something good came of this. Kind of dope. The SLA then called this inadequate and asked for $6 million more. The Hearst Corporation said it would donate the additional sum if Patty was released unharmed. So in April, the situation changed dramatically. A surveillance camera took a photo of Hearst participating in an armed robbery of a San Francisco bank, and she was also spotted during the robbery of a Los Angeles store. She later declared in a tape sent to authorities that she joined the SLA of her own free will. I think most people have seen the picture of Patty. She's wearing like a beret, and she's got like an AR-15, yes, and she looks all badass and shit, standing in a bank. So finally, on September 18th, 1975, after crisscrossing the country with her captors or conspirators, for more than a year, Hearst, or Tania, as she called herself, was captured in a San Francisco apartment and arrested for armed robbery. Despite her claim that she had been brainwashed by the SLA, she was convicted in March of 1976 and sentenced to 7 years in prison. She served 21 months before her sentence was commuted by President Carter. After leaving prison, she returned to a more routine existence and later married her bodyguard. And President Clinton actually pardoned her in January of 2001. So, there's an important distinction here to make, too, because the notion of Stockholm Syndrome was so new that Patty's defense team actually used the term brainwashing to justify her actions. So it's important to understand that brainwashing and Stockholm Syndrome, they're definitely not the same thing. And so, it's a question of whether or not Patty was a victim of, for lack of a better term, Stockholm Syndrome, or did she willingly come to identify with the political and social values of her captors? We really don't know. And she might not either. And she might not either, right? And what we do know is that some of the reasons used to insist that she willingly participated in crimes with the SLA sound suspiciously victim blamey and seem to miss the psychological point, that all the points that you made, which is survival at all costs. Now, Jeffrey Toobin, he's the chief analyst at CNN. If you remember this guy, I'm not saying anything that folks don't know. He was the dude who got in trouble during the pandemic for whipping his dick out in a Zoom meeting. He got his job back.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Got his job back. Doesn't believe Patty Hearst when she said that she was brainwashed. And he actually wrote a book called American Heiress about why he doesn't believe her. And here's some evidence he cites that supports his theory. So he says, Patty and 2 of the SLA members decide to go shopping. They need stuff, and they go to a sporting goods store. Bill and Emily Harris go inside the sporting goods store, leaving Patty in a van across the street with the key in the ignition. She's free to leave. She can drive away. She can walk away, but instead she waits. So Bill and Emily decide to shoplift. They leave the store. They get tackled. Patty comes out of the car, literally guns blazing, is my understanding. He says, Does she drive away? Does she walk away? No, she picks up a machine gun and fires wildly across the street to try to free Bill and Emily. Doesn't work at first, so she picks up another gun and fires another fusillade, I think I'm saying that word right, of bullets across the street, miraculously not hitting anybody, thank God. In fact, successfully freeing Bill and Emily, and then they drive off together. So, that he says that to me is a symbol and demonstration of how Patty Hearst had really changed sides, because given the opportunity to walk away when her colleagues, her comrades, whatever, are arrested, she fired a machine gun across a busy street. And that to me is the act of a woman who would join the SLA.
That makes me so sorry. I'm sitting here trying not to just be like, shut up, you asshole.
Well, here's your opportunity to say that, because tell me why somebody from a psychological perspective in Patty's position might do what she did instead of seize the opportunity to get away.
We've done a lot of podcasts, Jen, and some have made me really angry. Mm-hmm. There's something about this one that really makes me want to scream. Mm-hmm. And I think it's along the lines of, how dare one person who has not experienced something tell anybody what they think they should or shouldn't do under stress and fear. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking about stress and fear in the way not the way you know it, you know a lot more about what that is. When I talk about stress and fear, and I think most, I'll say within at least my age group, 40-year-old white women, mm-hmm. I'm stressed about, oh no, the grocery store didn't have my thing, or oh no, my boss is, asked me things, or this is stress.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the fact that our brains can convince us of anything when we are in fear of our life. Mm-hmm. And if you don't believe that, first of all, just to remind you what your brain does, those, I should have looked this up before we did the podcast, but those pictures where it's like, I'm looking at the old woman, no, I'm looking at the young woman. Yeah, perspective. Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. So perspective is something that our brains are not good at. Mm-hmm. They don't often, if you're in a desert, you'll see a mirage because you're thirsty. Yeah. Our brains tell us things that help us survive.
We categorize for survival. We're not good with ambiguity.
No. And so our brains, and this is also what I think is really beautiful, our brains might skew negative, or if it's in a chance for us to survive, they're always going to go for hope. Mm. So what we're talking about here, I think for most of us who have not experienced extreme violence, trauma, or even more so the threat of your life being taken, we're not going to be able to make intellectual or rational sense of, this fucker from CNN. Were you using your brain when you had your dick pulled out? Right. Is what I'd like to ask him. But
he said he didn't know. He was on the wrong screen.
Cool.
But you have a meeting going on. Cool. It's not the appropriate time to pull your dick out.
Yeah, so I'm not going to really trust his opinion anyway, but I digress. Sorry. You can't think of this as, well, why didn't they leave? The door was open. They could have just walked away. So let's talk about what is happening when you're in fight, flight, and appease mode. And I've mentioned that word before. When you're in appeasement mode, that is a body regulating way of, I'm going to mirror back your emotions and be compassionate. Mm-hmm. Because if I become a threat to you, you're going to kill me. Yeah. If I just give up, you'll probably lose interest in me and kill me anyway, because I'm not interested anymore. Right. And, again, these captors do have an intent behind them. They need this person. So you learn very quickly how to literally appease your captor. Mm-hmm. And so here's what the low level consensus in the community, and when I'm saying, really what we're talking about here too, is when you're trying to legally get defense for these things, the legal system needs something to come in and explain this in a way that makes sense. And I think, again, the intentions are always good. The impact has just gone too far, and we know more now. So it's time to change that. Mm-hmm. But in order for this, quote, Stockholm Syndrome to even exist, people are at least in agreement that the person must be held captive and they're unable to escape. So think of yourself in a cage or chained. And often that is the start of where this comes out. So they didn't, it probably day one, put her in a car, yeah, she probably would have escaped. This wasn't day one, though.
Right.
You also have to be isolated from others, and therefore your perspective is not yours anymore. It's your captor's perspective, and they control that very specifically. They are not going to let you see what's on the media. They're not going to let you be like the Swedish guys who let you call your family. There is also, again, the main thing, and this is what you have to remember when you're talking about in the form of battered woman syndrome or other oppressor, aggressor type of pathologies that we'll say, is that there's an actual clear and direct threat to life. And the captor has not only invoked this threat to kill them, they demonstrate that they can. That's a key piece. Not just a threat of, if you fucking don't do this, I'm going to kill you. They actually can demonstrate that they can through force, through power, through manipulation, whatever they're doing. And lastly, the captive victim experiences the perpetrator's acts, and I'm putting air quotes, acts of kindness, of caregiving. But really the person is just depending on the captor for their basic needs, which are food, shelter, connection, and being able to use the bathroom. We're talking about your lowest level of human needs. And so what is often seen as the captor being kind to me or you is really just, to the person who's being victimized. You don't confuse lack of abuse with kindness. Right?
They need to keep them alive if they want to continue abusing them. So of course you're going to bring somebody McDonald's, like that guy Ariel Castro or whatever, who kept those 3 fucking women and ultimately children locked away in a basement. And then it's like, ooh, that's so nice of them. Well, no, it's not really. So this is where you get into that romanticized bullshit I talked about. And let's just look at the fairy tale beauty of the beast. And it only happens with women, it seems, this projection of romanticizing.
Yes, that's a really good point. Thank you for making that. And, this is the fact that anyone would judge and define this as this adverse experience, this traumatic experience as intimate love is just gross to me and disgusting, and just perpetuates this patriarchal view that men and the media likes to perpetuate, that women are, one, not dumb, two, so you're not falling in love with your captor. As I said, you're going into a deep state of survival that most of us, I hope, never experience, especially at the hands of another human being. It's safer to appease and align with your captor, because if you resist, they're going to get violent. And the fact is that law enforcement, hostage negotiation actually agrees this is going to save your life. So, call it whichever want. But, I think the J.C. Dugard story is what embodies this shift that we, not just as society, but as clinicians, as people, as law enforcement, as educators, anyone who is quote unquote holding space for these people needs to shut up. I'm going to shut up and listen to them and let them have their story and let them come to their own conclusion about what this dynamic was.
I think that's really important. And in the case of J.C. Lee Dugard, this is a really astounding and tragic story, but Carolyn is going to tell us how J.C. turned tragedy into empowering and educating other people, which I think is super cool. So on June 10th, 1991, J.C. Dugard was 11 years old, and she was abducted from a street while walking to a school bus in Myers, California. J.C. was kidnapped by convicted sex offender Philip Garrido and his winner of a wife, Nancy. And upon arriving at the Garrido home in an unincorporated area of Antioch, the Garridos took Dugard, her head still covered with a blanket, behind their house, where they had constructed a series of dilapidated tents and sheds. Garrido placed Dugard in a tiny little shed, and it had been soundproofed. How fucking frightening is that? Dugard later stated that in her memoir and an interview with ABC News that upon arrival, he handcuffed her and left her naked in the shed, and then he bolted the door shut, warning her, and this is where he's telling her, I can kill you, and this is how, that trained Doberman pinchers outside the shed would attack her if she tried to escape. How frightening for an 11-year-old. Ugh.
I know. Both of us are crying.
It's just awful. It's 11-year-old so awful.
Well, and I remember how old were you when the story came out?
91, so I was 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at one point, Garrido provided Dugard with a television, but she couldn't watch the news and remained unaware of the publicized search for her. Almost a month and a half after her kidnapping, by Dugard's recollection, Garrido moved her to a larger room next door, where she was handcuffed to a bed. He explained that the demon angels let him take her and that she would help him with his sexual problems because society had ignored him. Garrido would occasionally go on days-long meth binges he called runs, during which he would force Dugard to keep him company by performing sexual favors and engaging in various other activities. Garrido made her listen out for the voices he said he could hear from the walls, and often professed a belief that he was a chosen servant of God. And so he would cry and apologize and alternate between threats and telling her that he was sorry. 7 months into her captivity, Garrido introduced Dugard to his wife, Nancy, who brought the child a stuffed animal and chocolate milk and engaged in the same tearful apologies. Though Dugard craved the woman's approval at the time, in a 2011 ABC News interview, she stated that Nancy was just as manipulative as Garrido. And almost 3 years into her captivity, the Garridos began to allow Dugard freedom from her handcuffs for periods, so they kept her locked in the bolted room. Easter Sunday of 1994, they gave her cooked food for the first time, and then they informed her that they believed she was pregnant. And Dugard was 13 at the time, had learned of the link between sex and pregnancy from television. Dugard watched television programs on childbirth in preparation for the birth of her first daughter, which occurred when she was 14 in 1994. The last time Garrido raped Dugard was the day her second daughter was conceived. Her second daughter was born when Dugard was 17 in 1997. Now, I won't go into too much detail here, but law enforcement dropped the ball big time a number of times. It's awful. Feel free to review the Wikipedia link I included in the show notes if you really want to get pissed off about all of the times that law enforcement could have apprehended this motherfucker and didn't. Administrative failures across the fucking board. Anyway, shit finally unraveled in August of 2009 when Garrido traveled to the University of California, Berkeley with Dugard's two daughters and visited the campus police office seeking permission to hold a special event as part of his God's Desire program. He spoke with special events manager Lisa Campbell. She perceived his behavior as erratic and felt that the girls were sullen and submissive. Oh, God, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Like having worked in higher ed, and it's like, oh, you need somebody in higher ed is seeing this and doing something about it. It's it took this long.
How brazen of this guy.
Yeah, how brazen of the guy.
Psychotic.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's clearly sick too. Yeah. And how heroic of these women who are like, something's wrong with this whole situation. Something's wrong with these children.
They're women.
Yeah, they're women. So Lisa asked Garrido to make an appointment for the next day. Also very smart. Think on your feet. Come back the next day, which he did, leaving his name in the process, his real name. Officer Allie Jacobs ran a background check and discovered that Garrido was a registered sex offender on federal parole for kidnapping and rape. Garrido and the girls returned for their appointment at 2 p.m. the following day, and Jacobs attended the meeting. The girls appeared to Jacobs to be pale, as if they had not been exposed to sunlight. She felt their behavior was unusual. Garrido's several parole violations were a basis for an arrest, so Jacobs phoned the parole officer to relay her concerns, leaving a report on his voicemail. Garrido arrived at the parole office in Concord on August 26 with Nancy, the two girls, and Dugard, he introduced Dugard as her alias, which was Alyssa. The parole officer decided to separate them and got Alyssa alone, or Dugard alone. Mm-hmm. And so, maintaining her false identity as Alyssa, Dugard told investigators that the girls were her daughters. Mm-hmm. Although she indicated that she was aware that Garrido was a convicted sex offender, she stated that he was a changed man, a great person, and good with her kids. Comments that were echoed by the two girls. When pressed for details that would confirm her identity, Dugard became extremely defensive and agitated, demanding to know why she was being interrogated, and subsequently stated that she was a battered wife from Minnesota and hiding from her abusive husband. Parole officer eventually called the Concord cops. Upon the arrival of a Concord police sergeant, Garrido admitted he had kidnapped and raped Dugard. Only after this did she properly identify herself as JC. It was later suggested that Dugard showed signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Now, in 2016, during an ABC News interview, Dugard stated that her compassion and willingness to interact with her captor were her only means of surviving. The phrase Stockholm Syndrome implies that hostages cracked by terror and abuse become affectionate toward their captors. Well, it's degrading. Having my family believe that I was in love with this captor and wanted to stay with them. I mean, that is so far from the truth that it makes me want to throw up. I adapted to survive my circumstances. She repeatedly stated that as a survival mechanism, many victims are forced to sympathize with their captors. And that goes exactly to what you were saying.
Yep.
Now, you have had you've been so fortunate. I know you were with her last week, I think, to do a training with JC.
Yes.
And I know she didn't talk about her captivity really, or maybe she did. Yeah. But could you?
It's interesting because, so let me talk some context here. So, I've been licensed as a marriage family therapist since 2018.
Yeah.
I finished school in 2016. I've had a very long lifetime of trying to understand my own trauma, trying to understand my own things. And really, I think like most clinicians and most people who are interested in science and the brain and the body, you want to understand yourself. You also want to help people.
Yeah.
And, as I've been doing this, and it's really beautiful how this episode is coinciding with some questions I'm asking myself about what am I doing when I'm in the room with someone, and what have I been taught by other people who have really good intentions as well, and we're really trying to help people, but I think we're hurting them more often than not. And I think Jace's tale is, and that's how she likes to go by, versus JC is really asks you to look at that. And you're trying to study things and things and open up to you when you're open to your own insecurities and your own fallibility in this field. And I think that's, if you don't have that, you should look at that. Or if you're having a hard time, hearing this and agreeing or even seeing this perspective, get real curious about that. And so when I started going down that path, I started looking at different ways of getting outside of the therapeutic room. And that brought me to working with horses. I could go on and on and on about that in future episodes, which I would love to do. But I was able to connect with Dr. Rebecca Bailey, JC Dugard, and Margie McDonald, who are the founders of the Polyvagal Equine Institute. You might also be familiar with the Polyvagal Institute. Dr. Stephen Porges, Deb Dana. These are scientific researchers. They're the most funny, sick sense of humors, unassuming, take that, go have fun, make it yours, very what I would kind of see in academia is like, no, that's mine. I created it and you have to pay if you want to use that. It's not like that.
They're just interested in
helping people. Yeah. And so I got to go take a training there.
Cool.
And when I found out JC Dugard was a part of this, I kind of had this, honestly, it was gross. This is kind of like, ooh, what's she gonna...
Morbid curiosity.
A little bit of a morbid curiosity. And like, oh, this is someone kind of famous. Yeah. And that made me feel gross the minute I thought that. Yeah. And I also went, well, I really want to be... How do I make JC, see that I'm not one of those people who's going to sensationalize her? I really... Actually, I'm in awe of you. Yeah. But I don't want to come up and... Can you sign your book? Like, what the fuck is that? So anyway, her book, A Stolen Life, is her memoir. And what Jace did when she started working with Dr. Bailey and working with horses is just tell their story. And what they appreciated about Dr. Bailey, and you can actually take this course for free.
That's awesome.
I put it in our show notes, the Polyvagal Institute. You can watch Jace and Dr. Bailey talk to Stephen Porges about this story. Cool. And really help you understand what we're talking about. Why being given a media term that then turns into People magazine and hype. We're being really disrespectful.
Well, it's so typical of our society, sensationalizing, and let's quickly give something a term, and let's make it real interesting, and by the way, let's borrow from patriarchal shit, and women helpless, we just look how easily we fall in love. Just give us a McDonald's hamburger and we're there while we're in your fucking dirty ass basement chained to a radiator. Like, come on.
Yes. Well, and the fact that I've heard people say, they've got that Stockholm Syndrome going on. And we've all done it. I've done it. I can't say I haven't done these. I'll often say, oh, my OCD's acting up because I need to put my laundry away. That's not okay to do either.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not to shame you for wanting that, but you got to look at how you're talking about this. And there's a person behind that story. And there's an experience behind that. And we have to, again, be very, very careful what our judgment is.
Yeah.
When we are trying to connect with them and then asking them questions that inherently undermine their experience.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's taken, I took that training a while ago, and I'm trying to get certified through the Polyvagal Equine Institute, which I'm thrilled about. But, you know, the antiquated media-driven term is just wrong. It's just wrong. And what Dr. Bailey and Dr. Porges and Jace are trying to do is offer you an alternate perspective.
Good.
And so if we go back, let's go back. So anyway, so Jace is a lovely, well-adjusted, gross sense of humor. Like, you could just giggle with her.
Yeah. Very
quiet, very, you know, sort of, Dr. Bailey's very loud and kind of brassy, I would say, kind of like you and I. Margie McDonald is the horsemanship side, who's all, you know, business. And you're kind of like, okay, I got, you know, you're really the herd leader here. I don't know who are you, all these three women. And they talk about how they interact with one another and talk back to one another and fight sometimes.
Good.
And then kind of repair and say, well, okay, let's go back to what we're trying to do. So they're lovely. This is in Santa Rosa. I encourage everyone to go up and take part in this. And they want you to. They want to build their community. But anyway, so let's go back to those 4 key components that I talked about that the media will term and mental health will term in Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah. And let's talk about what was happening for Jace. So we've got 4 things: the threat to survive, perceptions of kindness, isolated from rescue, and a belief in an inability to escape and again, survive. So I want to read you this quote that Jace has in her book, A Stolen Life. He would try to make me smile with all those silly voices he would make. I feel this was all part of his plan to manipulate me into being compliant with him. He used powers of persuasion to gain my trust. He became my entire world. I depended on him for food, water, and my toilet. He was my only source of amusement. I craved human connection so much by then that I actually looked forward to him coming to see me. So if you take that, just those quotes, and layer that over threat to survive, she needed to keep her captor in a good mood. That's brilliant. At 11. Yeah. That's something that was in that little girl that saw, if I can be amusing and be sweet, maybe he'll be nice to me too. Yeah. And I'm going to do more of that behavior because it gives me what I want and less of the behaviors that trigger him. Yeah. Or again, they don't use that word trigger, they use activate very specifically in Polyvagal Institute. The perception of kindness. Well, she was isolated. She needed connection. So if it wasn't from her captor, who was she going to get it from? Yeah. And humans need to connect to survive. Yeah. This explains why a child will go to hug their parent who physically abuses them and still want them to love them. Yeah. Again, isolation from rescue. 18 years. Yeah. 18 years from 11.
Unimaginable.
I didn't even know how to make my lunch at 11. Jesus. And this little girl was having to learn how to appease a fucking psychopath.
And having a child by 14.
Raped. Yep. And having to make sense of that. Yep. You know? Yeah. So to that CNN guy, fuck yourself. Yeah. You talk to me about what you would or wouldn't do and how you would or wouldn't escape after 18 years. Yep. Cool. All right. Lastly, the belief in an inability to escape. First, she was handcuffed in a room. Then he systematically gave her, quote, freedom. But it wasn't freedom. No. And by then, at 14, she had to worry about her kids.
Well, people don't realize that you don't have to tie somebody up. You don't have to physically restrain
Yes.
them to control them.
Yes.
It is mental control. It is constant threat of fear and physical harm that keeps people compliant.
Yes. Well, and this is where the polyvagal theory comes in. And I've mentioned this a lot before. And again, we could do a whole episode just on this.
Yeah.
This is a polyvagal theory is, and again, that word's very scary to people because what we're talking about is your vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And your central nervous system. But this is a blended interplay of an old way of seeing our central nervous system. It's not a light switch. I'm not, I'm in autonomic system, or I'm in fight and flight. Mm-hmm. Now I'm in safety and connection. It's constantly being measured by every aspect of our senses in our environment about who we're with. This is high level stuff that most of us don't know. And it's being logically and rationally stated to us, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you know what you feel and you know how you go through things. So number one, you cannot train for this shit. And like I said before, maybe if you're in the military, you might get some how to survive in it, but you don't know what you're going to do. You cannot empirically study this. It would be unethical.
Yeah.
You can't empirically trap someone and control them. So all we have is this case studies and listening to survival stories, and then not trying to make their story fit into some dumb theory that some asshole wrote. Sorry, research community, I love you. I'm not calling you assholes, but this is, I feel very, very passionate about this because it's time that we grow.
Yeah.
And it's time that we go, okay, that's not what was working.
Right.
Appeasement is staying in an uncomfortable, toxic, traumatic situation to survive. If I think like my captor and I anticipate their beliefs, I will survive. Yeah. That's brilliant. That is a coping mechanism that I don't even know if that's a coping mechanism. That is a coping mirroring. It's not attachment. You're not attached to this
survival strategy.
It's a survival strategy. Your brain is doing its best to help you see any act of, quote, kindness or moment that you didn't die or get abused as a moment of hope and light in a truly hopeless situation that you have no idea when, where, or how will end. Yeah. This is human survival and resilience at its most primitive and remarkable level. It is absolutely unpleasant to think about what our brain is going to cognitively tell us in that environment. And Jace will talk about this frequently, that if her brain started to kind of go into this logical, cognitive, rational space, she'd start to have panic.
Oh, that makes sense.
And so when you actually go, wait, let me just go, it's almost like you're dissociating in that moment, but is it conscious, is it unconscious? It doesn't matter. Right. It's what that person is experiencing and how their brain is often going to say, oh my God, we're here. That's a perception. And we're attempting to survive. If my body can help my brain feel okay, then I'll have hope, and then my brain will keep me going. Yeah. And this is how just heartbreaking this is. And we all need to look at this quote. Life is not kind to all of us. Yeah. That's from J.C. Dugard. Be grateful that you don't know what this means. Yeah. Be grateful when you don't understand why someone won't leave a toxic situation or your family judges you or your friends judge you or a fucking clinician that you go to get empathy and they ask you that same question, they get frustrated. How dare you? How dare you? I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. I am so grateful that I don't know what this term means in my body. And I am humbly here to listen alongside with a growing group of other people who are trying to no longer pathologize, criticize, or abuse you further. And if I have done this to you at any point in your life or any of my friends, I am so sorry. Yeah. And I'm just going to have to take a second.
Well, I can't think of anywhere where you've done it to me. And as you know, I've endured significant trauma as a child. And anytime that I've talked to you about that trauma, I have not experienced any judgment, any sort of like inclination to classify. You've just listened. And I think listening is key. And I hope this will help you all kind of reframe this notion and stop using the term Stockholm Syndrome, because what we're really talking about is survival. And as Carolyn said, hope and pray that you never find yourself in a situation where you have to do what JC did. I don't know about Patty Hearst. I don't know definitively if what she did was survival or if she did identify with her
captors.
one
asked her.
And when you do ask her, she tells you this: I was surviving. I was merely surviving. So in the interest of listening to survivors, people who have gone through this, which is what we're obviously advocating for, stop trying to define and just start listening. And that's our show for today. So we hope you enjoyed it and learned some shit. And also, shameless plug, please give us 5 stars, go on TikTok or whatever the fuck. We're doing a bunch of shit right now.
Yeah.
And take the time to write us a review if we can. We know life is busy, but we would really appreciate it.
Yay.
All right, everybody, have a great day.
Take good care of yourself after this.
Absolutely.
I know I do.
Yes.
I know I will.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.